Welcome back. If I may have your attention, our program is about to start again. And I am glad to introduce the next panel discussion, preparing for the upcoming impact of the European Accessibility Act. And I would like to call to the stage the moderator, Klaus Ockner, Managing Director for the Austrian Association for the Blind and Low Vision, as well as the fellow panel members, Christopher Patnoe, Head of Accessibility and Disability Inclusion at Google, Susanna Lorin, IWP GLC Honorary Chair and European Union Representative for J3ICT and IWP. We'll have also connecting remotely Alejandro Moledo from the European Disability Forum. Hello, Alejandro. And so Klaus will take the floor and from here. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. It's an honor to be here again in DC and to see you all in person after the dark years of COVID. Let's see. Yeah. Unfortunately, two of us couldn't be here. The two of Europe, Ima and Alejandro. I don't think I have to introduce all the people. The people know you, Susanna, know you, Christopher, and they know also Alejandro and Ima. What we want? Pardon?
This is a global thing, so I think you need to introduce the speakers.
Okay.
In Europe, everyone knows us, but...
Okay, let's do it. Yeah. I'm Klaus Höckner. I'm from a little country in the middle of Europe, Austria. We don't have kangaroos. I'm managing the job that feeds me. I'm the managing director of the Austrian Association supporting the blind and visually impaired. We exist since 1935, and we represent about 70% of blind persons, legally blind persons in Austria. And I'm also engaged in IAAP and in other organizations. That's the reason why I'm sitting here. Susanna Lorin has many hats, I think, but the one why she is here is she is the chair of the Joint Technical Board on e-accessibility for the implementation of all the laws and standards in the European Union concerning e-accessibility. And if I forget something, please
and
interrupt
I'm from
me.
Sweden, and we don't have Alps.
You're from Sweden, and you don't have... Yeah. And in Sweden it's cold. Christopher Patnoe, but Christopher is I think, is the most well-known person here in this room from Google, a small company which has a search engine. And Christopher is engaged in accessibility since several years. I know him from many conferences and different meetings that we had about accessibility. Alejandro Moledo del Rio is from Spain, as the name says, but he lives in Brussels, and he's leading an organization called EDF, the European Disability Forum, and the European Disability Forum is the umbrella of the umbrellas of the disability organizations in Europe, sitting in Brussels, trying to influence politics and trying to also to manage the disability policy in Europe. And the big non-present person is a very difficult name, Immaculada Placencia Porrero. She is senior advisor at the DG Employment in the European Union, and I think we really can say she is the mother behind the European Accessibility Act and all the other regulations that we have in the field of accessibility, digital accessibility regulations in Europe. Okay, let's start with Emma. Emma can't be here, unfortunately, but she sent us a video. Let's start with the video of Emma, and then we will have the first round of questions.
Hello, it's a pleasure for me to be here online to present you the work that we are doing in the European Commission in Brussels, presenting in particular the European Accessibility Act. The work on accessibility in Europe is very wide, and we consider accessibility as a wide concept that includes the prevention and elimination of barriers that pose problems for persons with disabilities in using products, services, and infrastructure. The intention is, as in the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, where the EU is a party, to have access on equal basis with others. For that, an element is accessibility, and then is complemented with reasonable accommodation, and that includes also assistive technology. The European legislation in accessibility, as I said, is a complex system of legislation, and where we have got a specific thematic legislation. For example, I would mention low platform buses, or in the area of ICT, electronic signatures. We also have got a specific horizontal legislation. Let's say the more wider example is the European Accessibility Act, but and I will refer to it in a few minutes. But also the Web Accessibility Directive can be considered in this group, as it covers the accessibility of all public sector websites and their mobile apps. Finally, we have funding related legislation, such as public procurement, that requires that whatever is bought by contracting authorities, when it is going to be used by people, it would be bought accessible, and it doesn't matter whether it is for their own employees or for members of the public. In addition, we have funding-related legislation that is related to the EU funds. When EU funds, for example, the structural funds, require that use of the funds respects accessibility. Now, let me now dig in the European Accessibility Act, which is the subject of today's session, the focus of today's session. What is covered in the Act? The Accessibility Act contains basically two key elements. First, it imposes accessibility requirements to a number of products and services before placing them in the market. And the second element is that it uses exactly the same accessibility requirements to render, we can say, operational those requirements that I mentioned that exist in other EU law, requesting accessibility, but without specifying what those requirements are. In addition, the Act sets obligation for authorities answering the European emergency communication number. In our case is 112. In the US 911, in our case 112, to be accessible, and it requires for that it is answered using the same means, whether it's voice, real-time text, or total conversation, than the calls that these authorities receive. In relation to the built environment, it sets some requirements, but it's up to the member states to decide to adhere to those requirements or not. The services that are in the scope of the Accessibility Act are basically telecommunication services, services that provide access to audiovisual media services, because the audiovisual media service content itself is regulated by another piece of legislation, and certain elements of transport, mainly ICT related, their websites, transport services, the websites, information, including real-time information, but also self-service terminals and ticketing, electronic ticketing. It also regulates the accessibility of consumer banking services, of e-books and their dedicated software, and e-commerce. So that all websites that contain e-commerce will have to be accessible following the same accessibility requirements that we set for other websites. Now, the products in the scope of the Act are general purpose computer hardware and their operating systems, certain self-service terminals, in particular all payment terminals, and it also includes telecom equipment and audiovisual media service equipment, as well as e-readers, dedicated e-readers for specific books. What are the key provisions of the Act? The key provisions relate to, as I explained, setting the accessibility requirements. Once those requirements are complied with, the products, the services which are accessible, get the assurance of free movement within the Union. By the way, this applies also to importers of products. So the Act will impact any product, any service that is entering the European Union, and clarify what are those obligations for the different economic operators, including the manufacturer, the distributors, but also, as I said, the importers. For products, when they comply, they will get the CE marking, and for services, they need to explain how they comply with the accessibility requirements in the terms and conditions. The directive allows for setting standards that provide presumption of conformity. Let me say a few words about the enforcement. The directive starts with a soft entry point. Basically, economic operators self-declare compliance with accessibility requirements, but then it complements that declaration with checks by specific authorities, some for products, some for services, that need to be proactive in checking the compliance of accessibility. And finally, the directive reserves the right of persons with disabilities and those who have a legitimate interest, for example, their organizations, to take actions before the court or relevant administrative bodies. And it requires member states to set penalties which are proportionate, dissuasive, and effective. And also complementing remedial action, because at the end what we want is that those accessibility, lack of accessibility is really remedied, so that persons with disabilities can of course get access. The directive also contains a number of annexes. I referred already to the first annex, Annex 1, that contains the accessibility requirements related to information about the product or the service, but also their user interface and the specificities on its functionality, depending on the product, depending on the service, and some are for all of them. Annex 2 contains some examples of those. In addition, the first annex contains functional performance requirements. Those are requirements that the products and the services need to fulfill in order to be accessible, or as a kind of compliance check when some technical requirements might not be applicable or difficult to apply. At the end, the product or the services must be accessible and should be used, for example, without vision or without hearing or with limited dexterity. As I said, Annex 2 contains some examples. Annex 3 contains the requirements for the built environment, and Annex 4 and 5 contain some elements for the conformity assessment for the products or the compliance or services. It indicates how to declare, for example, by the economic operators. Finally, Annex 6 contains some elements for calculating or to help to calculate the disproportionate burden when the economic operators think that this is the case. That has to be calculated. Now, let me go a little bit more in detail in the issue of standardization. The directive, as I mentioned, allows for the Commission to use accessibility standards in order to provide presumption of conformity. The Commission, in order to set those requirements, then set those standards, set a mandate or issues a mandate to the European standardization organizations. In this case, we're talking about Mandate 587, and that mandate basically requests European standardization organizations, Sensenelec and ETSI, to revise 3 existing European level standards. The most known by this audience would be EN 301-549, in order to fulfill or address all the accessibility requirements of the directive. Then it also requires to revise the standard on design for all and the standard on the built environment. In addition, it requires the development of 3 new standards. One for the accessibility of non-digital information, another one for the accessibility of the answering to the emergency communications, 112, and finally for customer and support services. This request, this accessibility mandate 587, has been accepted by the European accessibility organizations, and we hope to have the standards ready before the starting or the entry date of the directive. By the way, the directive is applicable from June 2025. This is the cut date when all products and services above mentioned before need to be accessible. We have also started checking the national legislations. The member states need to send to the Commission how they translate into national law this directive, and at this moment we have open infringements with all the member states so that the directive is transposed in an accurate and correct way. Let me just go back to the standards, because differently to previous standardization requests that we had, Mandate 376, for example, or 420, or where there were policy requests, now we have a standard that is linked to legislation. Hence, the European standardization organizations, when ready, will have to submit to the Commission these revised standards, these new standards, and the Commission would need to approve that they correctly related to this to the European Accessibility Act, and when doing so, the Commission will publish a reference in the official journal, and that will trigger the presumption of conformity. Let me say that we see the difficulties of the limited capacity yet to apply accessibility to make sure that the products and services are accessible. So we have launched a resource center called Accessible EU with the purpose of building that capacity for implementing EU law. The Accessible EU will support identify and support the stakeholders, will provide training, would gather information, would be a contact, one-stop shop for accessibility in Europe, and create this common space where persons working on accessibility can come together and share information in order to have, at the end, excellence professionals in Europe. This will be done by having trainings, for example, and events in all member states. There are over 80 events planned per year. There will also be some work on supporting standardization and some studies on specific issues related to accessibility. Well, this is all from my side, and I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. This was a good overview from Emma. I would like to deep a little bit more to dive a little bit more deeper into the topic and to ask Susanna first. Let's say the European Accessibility Act is here, finally. Finally, we have legislation with teeth, which where also some obligations are here for ICT and for transport and for blah 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 and all these different companies and sectors of industry that are touched by the European Accessibility Act. But how you can describe the work of the Joint Technical Board that you are heading, because you are working with this mandate 587, where you have all the 6 standards which have to be in force till 2025. On the 28th of June 2025, all the things should be ready. Will they be ready until then?
No. I can't imagine that we will be ready at that point, but we do our very best. And I must say what Emma always says, that even if the standard is not in place, that doesn't mean that everyone in scope of the directive shouldn't do their job, because really this legislation, if you compare it to the Web Accessibility Directive, which I really believe has teeth already, but it was very clear that the law was just stating who is going to be accessible and what is going to be accessible, but the how was in the standard. That is maybe easier for people to read. The Accessibility Act is a very long document, and it is already in the legal document. There are some requirements, so general requirements and also some requirements for services and products, and then but at a third place there's specific requirements for specific products and services. So already you need to read in 3 different places, and then you're supposed to go to the standards. So that makes it a little bit more complex for industry that needs to comply with this. But really, the law is already there, and you need to meet the requirements of the directive, no matter when the standards are ready, so to speak. And also, speaking about the 301/549, it's already out there. It's already in the official journal, because it's now the presumed conformance of the Web Accessibility Directive, which is the legislation covering public sector. So you can start there, and then of course it will be updated, and we will have some additional things in it probably. But it's not like you don't have anything to go by. So you could start with the 301/549 already and go from there and kind of prepare. And I must say, if I may, that I was in the same, been in this for a long time. So a couple of years before the Web Accessibility Directive entered into force, the governments of Europe most of them were sleeping. They had no idea this was coming. It was just the experts and the community talking about it. Now, when it's coming for the commercial sector, they are on their toes. So I think we have a very good chance of making things happen this time, and it has a much better kind of push from all stakeholders. So even if standardization is moving slowly, and for several reasons, I will not blame anyone, but it took time before the contracts were in place and so on. But now we do have the experts in place, and we are working, and it's also a big difference from the latest mandate we had. We are encouraging more people even outside of the standardization world to help us. So I don't know if anyone could put something in the chat or something like that, but we do have a GitLab opportunity, so we can also take in comments and questions and requests from people who are not in the standardization world. And I think that is a very big, I'm very happy that we managed to do that. And we're also working on the accessibility of the whole thing. But that will take a long time, but I hope that we manage to produce a standard that is also more accessible to people with disabilities in itself, the document in itself.
Sorry. I think the big thing is that we have the first time in history we have in 27 countries of the European Union the same legislation according to accessibility. Because when I started to work in this field in 2005 or 2004, 2005, nobody was interested in accessibility in many countries of the European Union, and they all had laws, but they had no enforcement. Now they have enforcement, and that's the big thing that we have now with the European Accessibility Act and all the underlying standards. Yeah.
So we don't have the same law because it's a directive, so it's not the same law, but we have a common understanding of the technical.
Technically not, but we have the frame. And the directive has to be transposed has to be transposed in national law, but we have the same regulations everywhere because the standards are always the same. Then
it will differ, but yes, in essence, it's the same. Yeah. The standard is harmonized. That's true. Yeah.
Alejandro, from the point of view of a DPO, of a big DPO in Europe, are you satisfied with the scope and with the directive itself? Do you think it will bring it is really the big game changer for Europe?
Thank you, Klaus. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So, first of all, many thanks to basically IWP for the invitation. I wish I would be there with you. That would be really, really nice. But to answer your question, yes, from EAA, from the European Disability Forum's perspective, this has been definitely a milestone, kind of like a turning point for Europe when it comes to accessibility, because as you said, Klaus, in the past, and Susanna as well, in the past, accessibility was not only understood by different member states within the same industry sector or even among disability organizations. So EDF as one of the main organizations representing persons with disability, we were calling for such a legislation for, I think, over a decade, because we saw that soft commitments from governments and from the European Union institutions did not deliver in the end. So there was different understandings and also different ways to implement accessibility, because one key aspect of the European Accessibility Act that Ima mentioned is that it also complements and will keep on complementing other European legislation when it comes to accessibility. Because in the past, okay, we had this obligation in the European funds regulations, in the European legislation on public procurement, that public authorities, companies must respect accessibility. But then what did it mean in practice? It's really differ across member states and across sectors within the same community. So the Accessibility Act brings a crucial element, which is a common understanding and common accessibility requirements for certain products and services, both for the public and the private sector. And something as well that has been very, I would say, smart from the European Commission's point of view is to use not the legal basis of anti-discrimination, but the legal basis on internal market. In the EU, we are 27 member states with a common internal market, a single European market. And these have been used by the Commission to set those common functional accessibility requirements that are included in the annex of the directive. So for all of us who are dealing with accessibility nerds, that's the nicest part to look at, the annex of the Accessibility Act, which is mandatory. And as Susanna mentioned, the standards are key because there are tools to be sure that you are in line with the legislation, but standards
Thank you, Alejandro. Sorry to interrupt you before, but my question is, is it easier now for big companies to enter the accessibility market when they have a common legislation in the whole European market?
Gosh, no. So I worked with Google, and I moved 2 years ago to try to get ourselves ready for the European Accessibility Act. That was the tentpole in terms of my moving. And I couldn't get anyone to pay any attention until June of last year, because the transpositions were supposed to be done. So we gave them a year to put things together. And since June until now, we're starting to see more and more people pay attention. We're starting to see more and more organizations inside Google really realize that this is big, it's important, and we have to get started. So if I can give you, this is primarily an American audience, so for those of you who are in an American company looking at going into the European Accessibility Act, let me give you a couple of things that we've done that's been helpful. So one is start with WCAG. There's the 2.2 out as of last week, so pay attention to that. Pay attention to EN 301549. That is a great place to start. Look at that, find the deltas from WCAG and apply that towards the products that you have. I'm not going to give you any recommendations, I am not a lawyer. But pay attention to the EN 31549. Then take a look at the directive. Even though the directive will not be applied to every single country in exactly the same way, 80% of it will probably be common. So as you're waiting for all of the legislation to be finalized and getting the resources to be able to understand what it means in all of the different languages, start with the directive. Move forward and building towards the directive. And then get help, because I don't speak 27 languages, and I wouldn't trust Google Translate to do it legally correct in all of these ways. So identify the countries that are most important to your market. Make sure you understand their laws. Make sure you understand the ramifications on them, where it differs from the standard directive. And this is sort of how we started doing this. And as we get through these high priority countries, then we start taking a look at the deltas farther and farther out. And then at some point, we're going to get to the point where we are compliant with all of it, and then we get to start doing the fun stuff again and making sure that compliance is never the goal. So we're talking about compliance here, and this is the most boring part of our jobs. We shouldn't be focused on the compliance, but you have to start there. But once you have it, then we get to have fun again.
What? From your point of view, Susanna, you're working for a long time also in the field of cognitive disabilities and psychosocial disabilities. This is one part which is totally missing in the European Accessibility Act, or not? And the other one is it really so complicated for an American, for example, for an American company that comes to Europe and wants to know how to be compliant? Do I have to look in 6 different standards to be compliant, to know all these standards? Then I need to have a legal advisor.
So I think this is not the boring stuff. This is just the basic, and then we have fun all the time, don't we, Christopher? Innovation. I mean, standard is I want it to be a tool for making sure that we can innovate. So no, I don't think. I mean, as Alejandro said, the standards are voluntary, so you don't have to read any standard. And I mean, one of the standards are on the built environment. So if you're not in that area, you don't need that one. So you can then at least it's one down. And if you're not, one of them is more a procedural standard on design for all, how to implement or how to use design for all principles in developing and designing. And I think that is really a tool that doesn't, at least not yet, have technical specifications in it. It will change a little bit, of course, but I mean, the EN 301549 is kind of the mother of all of this, and that is, I think, a good place to start. And then depending on exactly what products and services you are working on, then some of the others may be relevant as well, but they will definitely be smaller, the one on consumer services and so on. And then I forgot your first question.
The cognitive
impairments. Oh, the cognitive, yes. Cognitive load, so I forgot what you're saying. It isn't specifically, or if I would have been able to decide what would be in the law, it would have been more explicit when it comes to the cognitive, but we have all chances in the world, because we are now reviewing all the standards, to put more cognitive requirements in there. And at least in the joint technical body, that is what we are aiming to do for the 301549. There was already some work going on when we released the last version, and there has been other standards going on. There are ISO standards, there are W3C work on cognitive and other parts of ETSI and so on. So we hopefully will able to pick the best parts of that and put it into the next version of the standard. I can't say that this will happen because it's a joint effort and we need to reach consensus. So that I'm the chair doesn't mean that I decide anything. But I absolutely hope that we will move forward. And I will feel it as a personal failure if I don't get more cognitive into the standard when we release it in 2025. Yeah.
But the often mentioned 31549, I think, is a standard which is now recognized worldwide. As far as I know, they have it in Australia, they have it in Kenya, for example, and there are several other countries that adopted the standard. So it's really the backbone, let's say, of all the standardization or all the accessibility legislation that we have in Europe, I think. Yeah. And that leads me to the next question to Alejandro.
So before we go to the question, can I just to the point, I made a flip statement about compliance, the fun stuff being innovation. The compliance is absolutely critical, and the sooner you get to it, the sooner you meet those standards, especially given that all of your competitors have to do it. From a business perspective, if you can do this sooner, then you get to focus on the things that make your product, that make your service stand out. So that was really what I was trying to say, in perhaps too flip of a way. But the sooner you do the compliance, then you get to stand out. You have the experience, you have the dedication, you have the staff, and you have the ability to make your product better. And then when the rest of your competition steps up, you're that much farther ahead.
And really the essence I think the best part of the Accessibility Act is why is this law here? It is to maximize the foreseeable use of products and services. So if that's how you see it, then it makes total sense to do accessibility.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes totally sense to make products and services accessible when because we have the 1.6 billion people throughout the world that are excluded from access to services and products. And one thing that I always say when I'm in German-speaking audiences and so I say, okay, there are two things that are really, really certain in your life. Yeah, the first thing is you're going to die. The second thing is you will be disabled, or you die before you're disabled. Yeah? So disability will touch everybody. Yeah?
That's such a happy thought, Klaus.
Sorry to say it in this direct way, but that's the truth. Yeah? But back to Alejandro. Alejandro, European Accessibility Act and the EN 31549 and all the other standards are not the only legal things that we have in Europe. We have also the Web Accessibility Directive. We have the Audiovisual Directive, for example, and etc. etc. What's coming up next in Europe? What do you want to come up next in Europe?
Many things. We have elections next year, so obviously EDF and our members we will do our best to keep up with all the standardization work that is ahead of us. As you can imagine, we will try to be active and bring the lived experiences of persons with disabilities to the standardization world, which is very, very challenging. But we'll try to be influential in developing standards that are not only fulfilling the requirements of the legislation, but also allowing for further innovation, as Christopher said, like, to go beyond and do more fun stuff. So, as I said, next year we'll have elections. EDF has been advocating for incorporating accessibility obligations in other pieces of legislation, as I mentioned before, by referring to the European Accessibility Act. The the Accessibility Center that Imma mentioned in her intervention, the Accessible EU Center, this came as a demand from the disability movement to the European Commission because we US. So we looked at the US in this case, and we proposed to the European Commission to establish a new European agency for accessibility, similar to what we have in the US. The US Access Board, so we want to see one day an EU Access Board in which there are public servants with the expertise to support the community and member states in implementing accessibility and building up the resources and the capacity in Europe when it comes to accessibility. It's true that the EN 31449 is I would say, the most advanced standard on accessibility worldwide. I would say that it's very much aligned with the US section 508, and I think it's crucial that we keep this cooperation between different parts of the world to build global awareness and accessibility for different sectors. So in addition to repeating this call for a European agency that can be instrumental in that regard, we also believe that we can keep on using the legal basis of the internal market of the European Union, the single market, to have common rules as well for a common market when it comes to assistive technology, for example. In this regard, it goes very much under national competence, because the way people with disabilities receive their assistive technology depend very much on the delivery provision systems that they have at national level. So the same piece of assistive technology can go for free in one country, or for 100 or thousands of euros in another country, or you cannot even be able to access a specific piece of assistive technology in another EU member state. So we believe that the European Commission would have competence to act in that matter. And generally, as you know, as every country in the world, the European Union is very much focused on the digital transition. So we want to ensure that that transition is, as well as the green transition, is accessible and inclusive to persons with disabilities. And there's also an aspect that has been highlighted by several of our members, which is that digital should not be the only way to access essential services. So we see more and more that essential public services and also private services are only available through digital means, and for certain persons with disabilities, this is definitely an issue. So we will keep on reminding that there should always be a human way to access those essential services as well. And many other things, but I think I will work with all our proposals.
Okay. We will collect them and bring them to you. Okay. If you look to Europe, Europe is said to have more strict laws than other parts of the world. For example, the data protection guidelines that we have, for example, and accessibility, and all the accessibility guidelines that we have, for example. We spoke about the artificial intelligence in the last panel, or you spoke about artificial intelligence. Do you think that these regulations in Europe will hinder to implement accessibility measures in big companies? Or because you are not allowed to collect data, for example? Yeah?
That's an interesting question. I think the laws are necessary. I think giving people a reasonable expectation of what you can and can't do is important. There's nothing more difficult than being creative on an empty page. Without understanding the constraints, you don't know where to start. So understanding what you can and can't do is an important aspect of being creative in terms of creating solutions. What's interesting to me is, as a provider of assistive technology, we need to create something that fails gracefully downwards or increases in value upwards based off the amount of data that you'll be willing to share. Because if we don't provide value, if we don't know who you are, no one's going to use it. No one's going to trust you that if I give you my data, I'm going to have something that's worthwhile. So it behooves us technology creators to create something that's valuable and meaningful, even if we don't have any data about you. But if someone is willing to provide more access to who they are and context, if you provide something more valuable, they're gonna get the value from it. So the laws provide a constraint that allows us to be creative in how we design products. And the challenge is, though, what is too onerous is always sort of on a pendulum. It's too onerous for a while, and then it gets too easy, and it becomes too onerous again. And we're always fixing yesterday's problem. So as we create flexible solutions, you're going to have to realize that someday you get more, some days you get less. But you have to create something of value, and that can only be done in collaboration with the community. One of the things that's unfortunate, and maybe it's just this conversation, is we haven't talked about how much the community has been involved in the creation of these statutes and these regulations. The community has been deeply engaged, and it has to be, because only then can we understand the real value and necessity of these things. So we spend a lot of time talking about regulations and requirements, but it's all about providing a better life for people with disabilities, and how the community was engaged in the process. And with that partnership, then we can understand what's too onerous and what's not. And the big companies, we have to react because we want to work and provide value in these different countries. So whatever laws we have to work with, as long as we have a chance to participate in the creation of them and have an honest conversation, say, I think this is too onerous and here's why, then we have an opportunity to cast the laws in a way that's helpful for everyone. But if it's something that gets thrown over the wall, and this has not been, but if you get to that point where things get thrown over the wall, then it's very difficult to have that cooperation. So is it difficult? Yes. Is it important? Yes. Are we going to do our best to meet them and meet the need of our users? Yes.
Yeah. My question was because we, as a small country in Australia, we don't have really reliable data on persons with disabilities, for example, because we are not allowed to ask the people about disability, yeah, and there we have, for example, we have the very curious thing that the number of the person of disabilities decreased officially in the statistics by 20% within 10 years, which is impossible because we have an aging population. Yeah. So, and the question is always about health issues. So it's against the GDPR, but there is no law without data. You have to have the data, and that's the big. I think that's the big connection point between artificial intelligence and the thing that we are speaking about. We're speaking about disability law in Europe, but we have to have the data to be able to implement all the laws also, and to bring it to the people. And that leads me to my last question: what can be done better?
How much time do we have?
No, we're done. Everything can be done better, but to me, if I'm now wearing my standardization hat, I really think truly that we need to be better in how we create standards and include people with disabilities in a better way, and we need to work much harder on that. That is really from the standardization, but also with others. I mean, it's like it's a little club of people doing standards, and we all know each other. And I think that is a really, really bad thing. So not only people with disabilities must be involved, but also other industry. Not only the leaders of the really big companies, but where are all the small and medium-sized companies? I mean, they don't have the time or the resources to join. So I think, really, again, the GitLab possibility to receive comments and ideas from people who maybe they're just interested in one specific requirement, but they really have something important to say there. That I think is we can do that much better, and we're really trying. So I'm hoping that we have a more transparent and more open and more accessible way of doing standards in the upcoming years.
Alejandro, 1 minute.
need to get paid as the experts we are. Every disabled person who is doing user testing or involvement in everything must be paid.
Famous last words?
Well, famous, now there's pressure. For all the work that we're doing, I think one thing that can be improved is awareness of what exists and awareness of what's coming. Because as we build more tools, as we build more features, if people don't know what exists, it's not going to help them. If we put everything behind an accessibility menu, people don't think they're disabled, I just need a little help. If we build a more accessible ATM and people don't know that there's a plug for headphones, that's not going to provide any help for them. So as we develop these tools and technologies and the legislation, how do we let people know how their lives can be improved? Nobody knows how to do this. You can't Google it, you can't Bing it, you can't chat GPT it, because sometimes you don't know what to ask for. So the challenge is, and this is something for everyone in this room, how do we let our communities understand how their lives can be improved today, and through legislation and the meeting of the expectations of legislation, how can we let them know in the future how their lives can be improved?
Let's go out of our silos. Not preaching to the preachers.
Yeah.
Let's go out of our silos and tell it to the outside world. But we have time for 2 or 3 questions from the audience. Who will be yeah? Bianca?
Is there a microphone?
Is there a microphone for Bianca? Shout. You have a loud voice.
There is
a microphone is coming.
There is a microphone.
Thank you all for the information. It was a really good session at first. I'm Bianca Prins, Global Head of Accessibility at ING Bank. And I have one question for all of you, because we all know that we have authoring organizations in Europe. So for us, it's the Authority of Financial Markets who need to monitor how we work on accessibility as a bank. What I really notice, and I'm really looking on that part, also on what you're thinking is that we find that these organizations don't have the knowledge yet. Could you give any recommendation for those organizations how they can make sure that? And I can say it, but also would like to hear it from you, because from my perspective, I would say, come in and I'll give you a course, but...
Yeah, join the IAAP. Yeah. That's the obvious.
IAAP,
yeah. I mean,
we can host a show together, Susanna. So.
Join IAAP, make certifications.
Yeah, but really the community, the possibility to reach out, the connections where you can reach everyone, just talk to any expert in the whole world, that's a fantastic place to start if you are new to this community. But there are also many other communities, of course, but I would say start with IAAP.
Yeah.
Can I just add that the European Accessibility Act also foresees the creation of a working group putting in contact all public authorities related to the Accessibility Act, so to the specific legislation plus the disability community. And it is, in principle, this is one of the objectives of the Accessible EU Center and the future EU Access Board that we envisage for Europe in the near future, to really build the capacity of the authorities, because indeed that's a huge issue that is happening in all sectors. So that is the challenge that the Commission is addressing now with this big project of the Accessible EU Center, but it should be also what the future agency on accessibility should be. And we are obviously recommending such entities at national level as well. For example, Poland has one.
There's one thing to mention, what Christopher said, that's the language barrier in Europe, okay? Because we have so many different languages, that's really a problem sometimes. Yeah, but that was the reason for us, for example, to make the IAAP DACH region. DACH means for D for Deutschland, A for Austria, CH for Switzerland, and DACH means roof. Yeah? So that's the reason why it's called DACH, yeah? But the German-speaking community of IAAP, for example, and you are leading the one, for example, in the Nordic, and we have a Spanish one, we have an UK one, etc., etc. Yeah? Perhaps we have several languages several language-speaking communities then that can provide all the information material to their specific audience then in their specific language. That would be the best thing, I guess, yeah.
I thought the CH meant chocolate. Yeah. No, the thing that I would bring up in terms of how to raise the information is slightly different. I think what we need to focus on earlier before later is getting our leadership in our different organizations to realize that this is important. Because once leadership says this is important, the rest of the company is going to follow. So what do? First, learn the language of leadership and help them realize the importance and value of inclusion and building an accessible product. And then when they get off, then when I sign off, then it's easier to get the rest of the company to move on and join in, and then you take the classes with Ideal AP. But if you don't have your leadership engaged, you're not going to be able to move anything along. So where do you start? Start with your leadership. Learn their language, learn what motivates them and drives them. Align the work of accessibility to what they're already doing. Don't make them start up something new. Align what you're already doing to what they value, and then you have a better chance of getting the education through the system.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. There are some initiatives in Europe, like the Zero Project Conference, for example, where you have about 1,000 people from 80 countries coming every year to Vienna to exchange good ideas, good practices. And there we are in the parliament, for example. We're in the parliament to speak with the parliamentarians, the members of the government are there to convince them to set up accessibility from the top level down, because it's like you said, top down. Yeah. So 2 minutes.
No,
we are three. Okay, it's out. Yeah?
We're done.
So thank you very much for joining us. I hope there was some information also for you.
Thank you.
Hope to see you outside on the floor. Yeah? Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you again. And I just want to remind you about the networking lunch now coming up 12 to 1:30. And then please be back in this ballroom if you like to be part of the Town Hall CVTA coalition. Thank you very much.